It was a gloomy Friday in Jerusalem, the sky above Golgotha filled with heavy clouds, anticipating a moment that would change the course of time. Beneath 3 wooden crosses, a Roman officer carried out his assignment. Another execution. This time, the prisoner was Jesus of Nazareth. The centurion had a single duty: ensure Jesus died. And he followed through. Around midday, darkness fell across the land, lasting until late afternoon. At that hour, Jesus shouted in anguish, "Father, why have you left me?" Then, with one final cry, he exhaled and died. At that very moment, the curtain in the temple split down the middle, from top to bottom. The centurion, standing nearby and watching, declared, "Surely this man was truly God's son." That moment changed the soldier's life forever. The man sent to carry out Jesus' death sentence was deeply moved. He went from executioner to witness, from the one who pierced Jesus' side to the first non-Jew, to recognize him as the Son of God. He gave up his position in the greatest empire of the time and joined the people who followed Jesus. He traveled far and wide, sharing the message with passion, speaking as someone whose life had been turned upside down. His story lived on in church history under a name later given to him, Longinus. Before that Friday, Longinus had been a Roman centurion. These officers led groups of over 100 soldiers. They were respected for their bravery, discipline, and skill in battle. His entire world had been built on resilience, force, and unwavering duty. Becoming a centurion required more than muscle. It demanded sharp thinking, tactical skill, and an unyielding heart. And Longinus was all of that. His days were ruled by strict routines, order, and absolute loyalty to Rome. He had seen people die without blinking an eye. He had carried out orders without second-guessing. He had become a tool of the empire until everything changed. The city was still quiet, barely awake. But hurried steps echoed through the streets, and whispers filled the early morning air. Everyone was talking about one man, Jesus of Nazareth. Just the night before, he had been captured in the Garden of Gethsemane. One of his own followers, Judas Iscariot, had betrayed him with a kiss, trading him for 30 silver coins. Jesus was brought before the Sanhedrin, the assembly of religious leaders who charged him with claiming to be God's son, a crime they called blasphemy. They hit him, spat on him, and sentenced him. But they couldn't carry out an execution. For that, they needed the approval of Rome. So at sunrise, they delivered him to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of the region. Pilate, seated in the place of judgment, studied Jesus and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus replied with calm, "You say so." The priests and elders threw accusation after accusation at him, but Jesus didn't answer. Pilate leaned in and said, "Don't you hear what they're saying about you? Won't you respond?" But Jesus stayed completely silent. He offered no defense, no explanations. Pilate was taken aback. He had seen many prisoners plead, lie, and cry to escape death. But this man had a strange, powerful peace about him. At that moment, a messenger quickly approached the judgment seat. He carried a warning from Pilate's wife. "Stay away from this innocent man. I've had troubling dreams about him today." Pilate shifted uncomfortably. He sensed that something far beyond his control was happening, something he couldn't stop. As it was Passover, the tradition was to free one prisoner. Pilate saw this as a way out and offered the crowd a choice: Jesus or Barabbas, a well-known criminal, a man guilty of murder. But the religious leaders stirred the people into a frenzy. "Release Barabbas!" they shouted. Pilate, raising his hands, asked, "Then what should I do with Jesus?" The crowd exploded with anger. "Crucify him!" Disturbed, Pilate asked again, "Why? What wrong has he done?" But their cries only grew louder. "Crucify him! "Crucify him!" It became clear to Pilate that he couldn't control the crowd. So he called for water, and in front of everyone he washed his hands. "I am not responsible for this man's death," he said. "This is on you." He then set Barabbas free, and Jesus was turned over to be executed. The destiny of the Son of God was now in human hands. Soldiers led Jesus into the headquarters. As always, the centurion Longinus stood guard at the entrance, watching everything. He had witnessed countless punishments. He had seen many men take their last breath, but this day felt unlike any other. The man before them didn't resist. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He didn't plead. He accepted every strike as if he believed it had to happen. The soldiers, cruel and entertained, stripped him of his clothes. They tied him tightly to a post and began to lash him without mercy. The whip struck again and again, tearing into his skin. Still, he made no sound. Longinus stood nearby, arms folded, his face hardened by years of violence. But something was changing in his gaze. The others mocked the prisoner. They threw a purple robe around his shoulders, twisted thorny branches into a crown, and forced it onto his head. Blood ran down his face, yet his eyes stayed open, calm, focused, and unwavering. They placed a stick in his hands like a mock scepter, bowed in mock worship, and laughed loudly, shouting, "Hail, King of the Jews!" But Longinus didn't laugh. He simply watched, and for the first time in a long while, he felt disturbed. Not because of the pain or cruelty, but because of the quiet strength in this wounded man. They spat on him and struck him with the stick again and again. When their fun ended, they ripped off the robe, dressed him in his own clothes, and got him ready for execution. But Longinus couldn't turn away. Something deep inside him began to awaken. He didn't know why this man refused to fight back or even speak in his own defense. He couldn't understand how, even while being humiliated, the man showed no trace of anger, only deep, unwavering compassion. As the others laughed, Longinus began to wonder, who is this man really? He didn't yet know the answer, but he was about to. Because that very day, Longinus would witness the greatest expression of love the world would ever see, and it would change his life forever. The soldiers grabbed Jesus and forced him out of the praetorium. On his shoulders they dropped a rough, splintered cross, one soaked with the past suffering of other condemned men. The journey toward Golgotha had begun. At the front marched Longinus, clearing a path through the dense crowd. His job was to lead the prisoner to the place of execution, Golgotha, the Skull Hill, where Rome discarded the unwanted. Jesus walked forward through shouting and chaos. Some spat at him, others hurled cruel insults. But in the crowd there were also those who cried quietly. His mother, Mary, was among them, searching desperately for a glimpse of her son. She couldn't see him clearly, so she turned to the disciple beside her. "John, help me, take me to him." Together they pushed forward through the crowd. Suddenly, a soldier shoved Jesus harshly, and his weakened body gave out. He hit the ground hard, the heavy cross falling with a thud on top of him. The guard struck him, shouting, "Get up!" With great effort, Jesus slowly pushed himself to his feet. Mary and John reached him just as he fell again. Mary couldn't bear it any longer. She ran to him, knelt beside him, her hands trembling, her eyes full of grief. In a choked voice she said, "I'm here." Jesus raised his bruised face, looked at her gently and replied, "See, Mother, I am making everything new." His words weren't meant to soothe. What was happening wasn't just suffering, it was a prophecy being lived out in real time. The weight of the cross pressed hard against his torn back. His strength fading fast, Jesus stumbled once more. The soldiers lashed him again, shouting at him to stand, but he couldn't move. His legs had given out completely. Longinus observed carefully. He had seen many men fall like this before, men crushed by pain and fear. But Jesus was different. He wasn't broken. Something inside him remained strong, unshaken. Then Longinus spotted a man from the crowd, someone traveling in from the countryside, and ordered him, "You there, carry that cross." Slowly, Jesus pulled himself up. He looked at the stranger, and though his body was failing, his eyes held a look of quiet thanks. The man, Simon, took the weight of the cross, helping Jesus continue on the path. Their march moved through the streets as the city watched. Some women wept openly. Despite his wounds, Jesus turned to them and said, "Women of Jerusalem, don't cry for me. Cry for yourselves and your children." Longinus heard these words and again felt something stir deep inside. Who was this man, who even as he collapsed under pain, still thought of others? Finally, they arrived at Golgotha, a barren, lifeless hill used for death and disgrace. The crosses were ready, and the soldiers began the grim task. Jesus didn't resist. He didn't yell or fight back. Instead, he opened his arms, almost as if offering himself freely. Then came the moment. One soldier held his arm in place. Another lifted the hammer. The sound of the first blow echoed toward the sky. Mary trembled. John turned his face away, unable to bear the sight. The crowd reacted with each strike of the hammer. Some cried quietly, while others continued to sneer and mock. Longinus didn't move. He just stood there, watching. Once all three men were nailed, Jesus in the center, criminals on either side. The soldiers worked to lift the crosses upright. With a loud, jarring thud, the heavy wood dropped into place, jostling Jesus' body violently. The two criminals screamed in pain. One of them, full of bitterness, turned to Jesus and yelled, "Aren't you the chosen one? Then do something. Save yourself and us." But the man on the other cross, despite his suffering, looked over and said with effort, "Don't you fear God? We're getting what we deserve. But this man hasn't done anything wrong." Then, turning his head to Jesus, he added in a faint voice, "Jesus, remember me when you enter your kingdom." And Jesus answered with words that would echo through time, "Truly, today you will be with me in paradise." Longinus, still at his post, listened in disbelief. He had seen many die before, but never like this. This wasn't just an execution. It felt like the world itself was holding its breath. The sky dimmed. Darkness covered the land as if even nature mourned. Longinus stayed at his station, unable to take his eyes off him. Jesus, still hanging there, continued to speak. But his words weren't cries of pain, they were words of mercy. "Father, forgive them. They don't understand what they're doing." A chill ran through Longinus's chest. Forgiveness for the ones who beat him, for those who drove the nails, for the ones who mocked him, even for him. Far off, thunder rolled. A storm was coming. Caiaphas and the other religious leaders, feeling satisfied, turned and walked away. But Mary stayed, broken with sorrow, leaning into John's arms for support. Then Jesus, though weak, spoke again. Looking at Mary, he said, "Woman, here is your son." Then to John, he said, "Here is your mother." His body was growing weaker, but suddenly he cried out in a voice that pierced the silence, my God, why have you abandoned me?" Those nearby thought he was calling out for Elijah. Some believed he was asking for help, hoping the prophet would come to save him. One man rushed over, dipped a sponge in sour wine, put it on a stick, and lifted it to Jesus' mouth. But Jesus refused to drink. He didn't accept relief. He was determined to carry this through to the end. A heavy silence settled over the place. Then Jesus looked upward. The end was near. With one final surge of strength, he declared, "It is finished." and with his eyes lifted toward the sky one last time, he said, "Father, I place my spirit in your hands." He bowed his head and died. Then the earth responded. At that exact moment, the ground beneath them began to tremble. A powerful earthquake shook the city of Jerusalem. Stones split, graves burst open, and the thick curtain in the temple tore from top to bottom. The crowd went quiet. The same people who had mocked now stood frozen in fear. Many beat their chests, suddenly aware of what had just taken place. Then Longinus dropped to his knees. Before he could even think, the words left his mouth. His voice shook as he said, "Surely this man was truly the Son of God." The Roman centurion, the one in charge of the execution, became the first non-Jew to openly declare that the crucified Jesus was indeed who he claimed to be. And then a heavy silence settled over the hill of Golgotha. Jesus' body now hung still and lifeless. The soldiers, unsettled by the strange events, began pulling back. The crowd, gripped by fear and confusion, started to leave. It was the day of preparation for the Passover, and Jewish law did not allow bodies to remain on crosses once the Sabbath began. So they went to Pilate, asking for the legs of the condemned to be broken, so their deaths would come faster. Pilate approved the request, and the task was given to Longinus. He gave the order without delay. The soldiers took a thick metal rod, walked to the two men crucified beside Jesus, and broke their legs. Longinus, though convinced Jesus had already died, still had to confirm it himself. It was part of his duty. Following Roman protocol, Longinus picked up his spear, stepped closer to the cross, and with one clean motion drove it into Jesus' side. Instantly a flow of blood and water poured out. The Apostle John, who stood nearby, would later write with conviction, "I saw it with my own eyes, and what I say is true." Longinus looked at the wound, and then at his own spear, now marked by the blood of an innocent man. Without realizing it, he had just fulfilled a sacred prophecy: they will look upon the one they pierced. That moment wasn't just physical, it carried meaning: blood to redeem, water to cleanse. Some of that blood fell on Longinus's face. Tradition says he had suffered from a condition that blurred his vision. But as that mixture touched his eyes, his sight became clear. Right there, beneath the cross and the weeping sky, Longinus finally understood. He saw the truth. This wasn't a criminal. This was no rebel. He had pierced the body of God's Son. He dropped to his knees once more, but now as a man transformed, no longer a soldier of the empire, but a believer. Though the Bible doesn't describe what followed in detail, ancient traditions and early writings tell the rest of his story. Longinus, shaken to his core by what he had seen, couldn't simply return to life as usual. He wandered through days of restless nights. The image of Jesus, crucified and silent, burned in his memory like a fire that wouldn't go out. He could no longer carry out orders without questioning whether he served truth or only the force of an empire. After the crucifixion, rumors spread across Jerusalem, whispers of an empty tomb, stories of appearances, of people seeing and speaking to the very man who had died on that cross. Longinus didn't say much, but every word reached him, and deep inside, something lit up. He knew it was no rumor. Something within him confirmed this was not the end. Death had not won, and for days he lived with that awakening, unable to return to the life he once knew. Visions of Golgotha clung to him like a holy fire. He could still hear every word Jesus had spoken, recall every glance, and feel the weight of each silence. While the rest of the world returned to normal, Longinus could not. He couldn't go back to being the hardened soldier he had once been. The heart that had once known only war and duty was beginning to break open. When he heard the whispers, that people had seen Jesus alive, he wasn't shocked. There was no doubt in him, no confusion, just quiet, unshakable conviction. He believed Jesus had conquered death. And for the first time, Longinus understood what faith truly was. For the first time, the meaning of the cross, the depth of forgiveness, and the power of redemption became real to him. Everything finally made sense. He left his position behind. He gave up his armor, returned his weapon, and walked away from the army. No hesitation, no regret. That's when his journey of belief began. He found the disciples, searched for those who had known Jesus, and sat at the feet of the very people who once walked beside the man he had helped crucify. Soon, the name Longinus was spoken among the early Christians. The Roman centurion who once led troops in the name of Caesar now walked barefoot, carrying the message of a king he had once condemned. He traveled across the lands of Cappadocia and Caesarea, regions now known as part of Turkey, telling everyone about the one he had seen die. "I saw him take his last breath," he would say, "and in that death I found new life." His testimony had weight. It wasn't based on stories or rumors. He had lived it. He had stood at the foot of the cross, and his words stirred hearts. The hand that once raised a weapon now lifted the truth of the gospel with boldness. In those lands, Longinus preached the message of hope, and many believed because of him. He wasn't just any preacher. He was the centurion who had stood beneath the cross. But Rome did not take kindly to those who turned against its power, and before long, persecution came. Longinus was captured. He was interrogated, beaten, and warned that death awaited him. His captors promised him freedom if only he would renounce Christ. But Longinus, calm and unshaken, answered with firm faith, and so he was sentenced. The same empire that once molded him into a soldier now marked him as a traitor. He was led outside the city, and on a quiet, windswept hill he was executed, beheaded. Longinus died not with fear, but with his eyes raised to heaven, echoing the one he had once seen lift his gaze and say, "Father, into your hands I entrust my spirit." His remains were laid to rest in Cappadocia, and it wasn't long before the Christian community began to honor his memory. Stories spread of healing and miracles at his tomb. His name lived on, not as the man who drove a spear, but as one who had witnessed the truth, as a man of faith, and as a martyr. Over time, the church honored his legacy and declared him a saint, Saint Longinus, the one who saw, the one who believed, the one who gave his life for the one who first gave his life for him. And he wasn't alone. There were others you must know: Peter, John, James, Andrew, Philip, Thomas, Bartholomew, Matthew, Simon, Thaddeus, and James. From the narrow roads of Jerusalem to the distant edges of the world, these 12 men carried a message so powerful it could confront rulers, bring down empires, and reshape the course of history. They held no weapons, built no armies, and made no deals with power. All they had was their unwavering belief in what they had witnessed, and the courage to speak it. Thank you for watching this video until the end. If this story touched your heart, inspired you, or gave you something to reflect on, please consider supporting this channel. Leave a like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support helps us keep telling stories that matter. Until next time, may God bless you and guide your path.